Y'all think you know country music? You need to know this. Part 143. This is Gary Gene Watson. He was born in Palestine, Texas on October 11th, 1943. As a child, he lived and traveled in a remodeled school bus with his mom and daddy, Ted and Thelma Watson, and his 6 other siblings. The family's living was made by doing farm labor, in addition to his daddy working in different East Texas towns as a sawmill worker. Eventually, the family settled in Paris, Texas, which was where his mother's family was from. There, his daddy would start selling car parts. The family was very musical. His daddy loved blues music, and country music was there from day one. They went to a Pentecostal church, and they always played and sang music. Gene went to school, but he dropped out in the 9th grade so he could help support his family. Got a job working in the automobile salvage business. He developed a love for cars, and he learned how to work on them. Well, in 1961, when Gene was 17 years old, he got a job in Abilene, Texas, working on missile silos. And he had to lie about his age and tell him he was 18 to get the job. And he moved to Houston, formed a band, Gene Watson and the other 4, with the other 4 being one of his brothers, Eddie Watson, and 3 of his cousins, George Watson, Pat Watson, and Donnie Watson. Gene Watson and the other 4 actually got a little record deal with Houston-based Tonka Records, where they'd release songs like Please Don't Laugh at Me, If You Can't Come, Just Call, and You're What's Happened to Me. And that one was actually written by Gene himself. Gene would also drop his first name during this point, because Gary sounded too much like Larry and Harry and everything else, and people couldn't ever remember his name. So he decided to drop it all together and just go by his middle name, Gene. But Gene Watson and the other 4 didn't last too long, and they would eventually disband. In 1961, Gene worked at all different kinds of body shops around Houston, doing whatever he could to support his wife, Maddie, and his 2 kids, Gary Wayne and Terry. Then eventually he formed a new group called the Hellball Express, as kind of a nod to one of the 4 cars he had. Well, they'd perform in Houston all through the 60s, especially at a place called the Dynasty Club. And there one night, he caught the attention of 2 businessmen who was very impressed with his singing, Russ Reeder and Roy Stone. Russ was a local record distributor, and Roy owned a record shop. So they got together and formed a little Houston-based indie record label called Wide World Records. And in 1969, they signed Gene Watson. His first single release would be a song called I'll Run Right Back to You, paired with a song called Autumn in June, which was written by Gene's cousin Bill Watson. His next release will be a song called John's Back in Town, written by Bill Mack and Waylon Jennings, paired with Florence Jean, written by country Johnny Mathis. Other single releases include The Birds and the Bees and My Eyes Are Jealous. Wide World Records had also released Gene's first full-length album in 1969, titled Gene Watson. It would include some of these singles along with some new songs. While this record did not make Gene Watson a household name, it definitely increased his popularity in the Houston area and all around Texas. But in Houston specifically, he got some radio station support from stations like KENR, KIKK, and KNUS. A few years later, Russ Reeder and Roy Stone had some creative differences, so they decided to go their separate ways. This resulted in Roy taking the previous masters they'd recorded for Gene under Wide World Records and re-releasing the album, Gene Watson, under his new label, Stoneway Records, in 1973. Meanwhile, Russ assumed full management over Gene's career, and he booked him, and he even formed his own label called Resco Records, just for Gene Watson. Gene's debut single for Resco Records was a song called Bad Water, which had previously been released by the Raylettes, who were Ray Charles' backup singers, on a record called Ray Charles Presents the Raylettes, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, on Tangerine Records in 1972. And surprisingly, Gene's cut of this song would enter the Billboard Country Singles Chart in 1975 at number 87. While number 87 is not a top 10, you got to understand something. Resco Records is an independent music label. So in 1975, for an independent label to get on the Billboard charts of any kind was quite impressive. Another song that would be in heavy rotation would be a song Gene recorded called Love in the Hot Afternoon. After love in the hot afternoon. song written by Kent Westbury and Vince Matthews. This song had previously been cut by several artists. Jim Ed Brown and even Waylon cut this song. They never released it as singles. But Gene's version will be extremely popular, especially in the Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and even some of the New Mexico markets, which at that time was a very big portion of the traditional country radio market. So it was a big regional hit already on the charts. All of this impressed quite a few industry folks, one of which was a man named Ed Keeley, the promotional executive at Capitol Records. Ed was so impressed that he flew down to Houston and negotiated a recording contract with Russ Reader. What this meant was that Gene Watson had just signed a record deal with Capitol Records, a major label. Capitol would then release Gene's very first major label album, called Love in the Hot Afternoon, produced by Russ Reader, which included a re-release of the song Love in the Hot Afternoon. But because of the timing of the release, the song had already been a hit on regional charts so long, it had already started to come down the charts. So that allowed it never to be a #1 hit, which it probably would have been otherwise. But it did hit #3 on the Billboard Country Singles chart. And it would also be named the #4 song in America for the year 1975. Not too shabby. Well, after the success of Love in the Hot Afternoon, Gene got kind of nervous. He started wondering what his next release was going to be and if it would top his first one. He wanted his next bit of material to be better than his previous. He also knew that Capitol could drop him from their label just as soon as they signed him. So he didn't sell none of his car tools. He put them in his toolbox and rolled them out of the way, put them up for a little while, just in case. One night after a recording session, songwriter Ray Griff took Gene into his office to play him some of his demos. One of those demos was Where Love Begins. Well, Gene liked the song and he recorded it, and it will be his second top 5 single on the Billboard Country Singles chart, hitting #5. In 1976, Gene's next release would be You Could Know As Much About a Stranger, written by Nadine Bryant. This one would also be a top 10 Billboard charting song for Gene. And that would be followed up with Because You Believed in Me, written by Arthur Leo Owens, Shorty Hall, and Gene Val. It would reach #20. Then came Capitol's second full album release on Gene Watson, titled Because You Believed in Me. And this one would also include one of my favorites, Bitter They Are, written by the one and only Larry Gatlin. This record did not achieve the success of his first one, but in 1977, his third record for Capitol would be called Paper Rosie, the title track being written by Dallas Harms. It would hit #3 on the charts. Gene didn't think this song suited him very good at first. He recorded it anyway, but he just didn't feel like it was ever the song for him. By listening to the song and him singing it, you'd never know that, but it was a huge hit. Also in 1977, his next album, titled Beautiful Country, would include 2 more Dallas Harms hits, The Old Man and His Horn and Cowboys Don't Get Lucky All the Time, along with another song, I Don't Need a Thing at All, written by Joe Allen. All 3 of these songs would be hits. Cowboys Don't Get Lucky All the Time would also be used in the upcoming movie soundtrack for the movie Convoy, at the request of Chris Christopherson. On June 7th, 1978, Gene Watson, Willie Nelson, Jerry Lee Lewis, Narvel Felts, and Joe Stampley would be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame's Walkway of Stars. Also in 1978 would bring Gene's next album, Reflections, which would bring him another top 10 record, the song called One-Sided Conversation, written by Joe Allen. Gene was about to do an overseas tour in 1979. This record also got a release in England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland before his 18-date tour. Now, there was also a song on this record that would go on to be probably Gene Watson's biggest song to date, a wonderfully tragic song written by Lawton Williams called Farewell Party, a song Gene recorded in one take at Cowboy Jack Clement's recording studio in Nashville.
I know you'll be glad when I'm
gone. This song had also been recorded by several artists. first being in 1960 when the songwriter himself, Lawton Williams, recorded it. Little Jimmy Dickens recorded it in 1961. Johnny Bush recorded it in 1963. And believe it or not, Waylon Jennings even recorded it. But Gene's cut would hit number 3, and he even named his band the Farewell Party Band. Next release, Pick the Wildflower Flower, another Joe Allen written hit, would hit number 5. Also in 1979, Gene's next record, Should I Go Home, featuring the single Should I Go Home or Should I Go Crazy, one of the best, would peak at number 5. This song again was written by Joe Allen. In 1980, Gene Watson had been with Capitol Records for 5 years and had several top 10 songs, many top 5s, and really big records. And he is about to have another one. Nothing Sure Looked Good on You, written by Jim Rushin, hit number 4. The next 3 singles, Bedroom Ballad, Raising Cain in Texas, and No One Will Ever Know, only made it to the top 20s. And Gene felt that during this time, Capitol had just stopped believing in him, and they just was not promoting the records like they were, and they wasn't even willing to. So in 1980, No One Will Ever Know would be Gene's last record for Capitol Records. Later on in 1980, Clint Eastwood wanted Gene to record a song that would be included on the soundtrack for his new movie, Any Which Way You Can. So Gene flew to Los Angeles and recorded the song Any Way You Want Me. This would be a top 40 hit. In 1981, he signed with MCA Records. His first record with MCA would be called Between This Time and Next Time. The title song was written by Ray Griff and hit number 17 on the charts. Second single, Maybe I Should Have Been Listening, written by Buzz Rabin, at number 23. In January of 1982, Gene would have his very first and only Billboard #1 song, a song written by Dallas Frazier and Larry Lee Favorite, another one of my favorites, called 14 Karat Mind, which would also be included on his 1981 Old Loves Never Die. 1982, his record This Dream's on Me would give him 3 more top 10s. Speak Softly, This Dream's on Me, and What She Don't Know Won't Hurt Her. In 1983, he'd have even more top 10 hits. You're Out Doing What I'm Here Doing Without, Sometimes I Get Lucky, Drinking My Way Back Home, and Forever Again. Then in 1984, his record Heartaches, Love and Stuff would give him yet another top 10 record with a song written by Johnny Russell, Got No Reason Now for Going Home. In 1985, Gene signed with Epic Records and released Memories to Burn, and the title track would hit number 5. Gene's next 2 records, Starting New Memories and Honky Tonk Crazy, wouldn't even make the top 20. During this time, Epic Records focused all their energy on the newer acts, and sadly they stopped putting their efforts into Gene Watson. Gene and his Farewell Party Band was still touring with everybody all the time, making a good living, selling out everywhere, but Gene became discouraged by Epic's lack of enthusiasm in him and his material. He even considered retiring altogether. Around this time, in 1988, Gene had started touring with a new act that Warner Brothers had signed a few years earlier, a man named Randy Travis. Randy's manager, Lib Hatcher, convinced Gene Watson not to walk away from the music business. Lib started managing Gene and booking him and got him a label with Warner Brothers Records by having him record a 4-song demo tape. To me, that just shows how out of touch a lot of these label heads can be. Here is a country music icon, but yet in order to sign him, you've got to hear a 4-song demo tape. Go listen to any one of his damn records. They speak for themselves. Anyway, he got the deal with Warner Brothers. And in 1988, Back in the Fire was released. The single Don't Waste It on the Blues brought Gene back to the top 10 on the charts. But the next 2 singles, Back in the Fire and The Jukebox Played Along, only made the top 25. Well, in 1990, Gene made his next Warner Brothers record called At Last. During this time, Lib Hatcher and Gene had a big dispute over management fees. They subsequently sued each other. In 1991, Warner Brothers released Gene Watson from their roster due to this ongoing legal action they didn't want any part of. This would mark the end of Gene Watson's major label recording career. Well, at this point, Gene turned to Jack McFadden, a veteran talent manager who had worked with everyone from Merle Haggard to Freddie Hart to Keith Whitley to Lorrie Morgan. Jack was also about to break a huge crossover hit with a newcomer to country music, Billy Ray Cyrus, and a song called Achy Breaky Heart that absolutely set the world on fire for some reason. But Jack knew about Gene's legal stuff going on, but he agreed to manage him anyways. Pretty amazing of him to do that. Well, Jack then approached everybody in town, but of course, none of the major big players wanted anything to do with this at the time because all these lawsuits hanging over everybody's head. Well, in 1992, Jack was able to get him an independent deal in Canada with a former producer and recording artist, Gary Buck, and his Broadland International Records. Their first release would be only released in Canada, but then in 1993 was released in the United States, mainly because of the success of one of the songs on there as the single, One and One and One, written by the one and only Buddy Cannon and John Northup. It hit number 66 on the Billboard charts. Then later in 1993, Gene signed another independent record deal with Step One Records, owned by Ray Pennington. Gene's next record would be Uncharted Mind in 1993, with the first single being Snake in the House. And during this time, some country stations actually added Gene's songs to their playlist. And this kind of kept things kicking around for country radio's audience for Gene Watson. Then in 1996, Gene's next record, called The Good Old Days, would give Gene more Billboard hits in 1997. This is a great record, y'all, and I encourage you to go get it, just by the way. Change Her Mind and No Goodbyes would both hit the top 100, which was great for an independent release. Now, it's been said that one of the reasons for Gene's radio success in the late 90s was because the programmers didn't even know who he was. And they thought he was just some young, new artist. So they played him. Well, in turn, a lot of their audience didn't know who he was. So it was attracting some of the younger audience to him. So it kind of worked in Gene's favor. Now, later on in 1997, Gene's next record would be a gospel record called Jesus Is All I Need, a record he'd wanted to make for a long time. Gene heavily included his family on this album. 6 songs were co-written by his cousin Bobby Joyce Harris and his sisters Virginia Ruth Watson Thompson and Mary Lois Watson sang harmony vocals on it. And then by the end of 1997 would be Gene's last record for Step One Records, called A Way to Survive, which included a brand new recording of his hit 14 Karat Mind, along with 7 other new songs. On June 12, 2000, Gene was given the Male Golden Voice Award at the 2nd Annual Golden Voice Awards, held at Opryland Hotel in Nashville. In October of the same year, Gene was diagnosed with colon cancer. He went through a series of medical tests at Paris, Texas Hospital, and then on to Houston Hospital. They performed laparoscopic surgery, meaning they didn't have to cut him too bad to remove the cancer. So he took some time off the road, including about a 6-month chemo treatment and a bunch of follow-up visits to ensure that the cancer was gone, which it was. Thank God. That next year, in April of 2001, Gene signed a new recording contract with Row Music Group, a label owned by country artist and songwriter Eddie Raven and Texas businessman Larry Barnett. Gene would travel again to Nashville to make his first record for RMG, called From the Heart. In August 2002, Gene was inducted into the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame, along with Nat Stuckey and Tanya Tucker. In 2003, Gene signed another record deal with Inner Sound Records, and in September of that year, his new album, Gene Watson Sings, was released. In April 2007, he signed a pretty big record deal with a pretty big independent label called Shinachi Records. Well, 3 months later in July, Gene and his band was traveling from Houston to Nashville to do an appearance on the Grand Ole Opry. Well, just outside of Nashville, their bus caught fire. One of the axle shafts had broke, and it's spewing grease all over the place. Well, Gene got out there and grabbed everything he could, and the band members too, from water bottles to Coke bottles to anything, knowing they couldn't put this fire out, but just trying to contain it from spreading. They fought it for 30 minutes and was able to keep it from getting to the floorboard. 30 minutes later, the firefighters got there. Nobody was injured, and he still played the Opry that night. Wow. Well, in September of that same year, his new record, the highly talked about In a Perfect World, would be released. And it would include guests like Mark Chestnut, Leanne Womack, Vince Gill, Rhonda Vincent, Connie Smith, and Joe Nichols. When it came out, the first single, I Buried Our Love, would hit number 64 on the Music Row Country chart. Then in 2009, he released his second and final album with Shinachi Records, called A Taste of the Truth. In 2011, he teamed up with his friend Rhonda Vincent, the Queen of Bluegrass, on a duet record that they made called Your Money and My Good Looks. Then in 2012, Gene formed his own record label, appropriately titled 14 Karat Music, or 14 Karat Records. He went in and re-recorded 25 of his hits and re-released them in a CD called Best of the Best, 25 Greatest Hits. Then in 2014, under his label, he recorded My Heroes Have Always Been Country, great record. In 2016, he released an even better record called Real Country Music. Y'all go get that one. In 2017, he released one called My Gospel Roots. Get that one. In 2020, I'm not even sure how or why it took this long, but thankfully, Gene Watson was inducted into the Grand Ole Opry. And most recently, in 2022, he put out a record called Outside the Box. Go get that one. Now, I want y'all to know that why Gene Watson is not in the Country Music Hall of Fame is a big mystery to me. I mean, don't y'all think he deserves to be in the Country Music Hall of Fame? Because I damn sure do. He still tours and records to this day, still tinkers around on cars, even got his own little shop that he likes to play around with when he has time. I just want to say, Gene, you're one of my heroes, one of the best voices in country music. I think you're one of the best song men in country music. And Hoss, we're glad you're still with us. Appreciate y'all watching. Don't forget to share this with your friends. Like and leave a comment what your favorite Gene Watson song, album, show that you met him at, memory, anything related to Gene Watson. Put it all in the comments. Let's get 10,000 freaking comments on this. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you next time.